it's interesting to think about the difference between sympathy and empathy. And on the surface, they're kind of similar, but empathy means that you can put yourself in the shoes of someone else and understand where they're coming from. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you endorse everything that they're doing. It doesn't mean that you're giving someone a get out of jail free card. It doesn't mean that you're making an excuse for bad behavior or for a poor outcome. It doesn't mean that somebody's got an open, free license to not take responsibility for their life. There are consequences for everything we do. And sometimes it's possible to make no mistakes and still fail. It's also entirely possible to be coming from a place that is not entirely misintentioned, and yet also to do overwhelming harm in your life and in the lives of others. One example of this that I think is huge is Nazi Germany. I've always liked certain aspects of the Nazi aesthetic. Hitler had plans for rebuilding Berlin as a world capital that would have been really amazing. Some of the concepts that were created in the mind of that fascist ideal were incredible. Another great example of innovative ideas which were grandiose and just awe-inspiring was the plan to drain the Mediterranean Sea with an enormous dam at the gates of Gibraltar, at the opening to the Atlantic Ocean, and reroute that water through northern Africa to create artificial lakes and transform part of the seabed of the Mediterranean and what currently is the arid Saharan desert of Africa into arable land. Now, I don't know if that's even possible, but what an amazing conceptualization to think about building a great society by taking charge of the destiny of your nation in that way. To have a sense of pride in building things and creating things and in doing things that are beyond the imagination of anyone else. If you want a taste of what that might have looked like, watch Amazon's Man in the High Castle. It's a great show and probably the best example in modern media of maybe some of the selling points of why Nazi Germany wasn't actually all bad. However, we have to put the brakes on. We have to say, okay, well, wait a second. I'm not advocating for genocide. I'm not saying that racism is okay or that harming people on a basis of their identity or beliefs is appropriate. And today we can look back at the Second World War or the Roman Empire or any number of other things in the past, and we can see that they are a checkerboard of good and bad. They're things that have something about them worthy of remembrance, worthy of celebration, worthy of honor. And they also have things which are a stain on the record of humanity. They have things about them that we should always remember and strive never to allow ourselves to be in the future. I think about how Hitler really probably didn't do a lot of what he did simply because he hated minorities. That wasn't really it. It was the perspective of his life that led him to where he ultimately went. And maybe that's one of the most important things you can realize, that people don't do bad things because they're monsters. We like to believe that there's two camps of people. There's evil people and there's the good guys. But the truth is, all of us have both of these things within us. We all have the capacity to be vicious and cruel and short-sighted, or to be pragmatic, well-adjusted, and progressive. It's not really that there is good and bad people. It's just when you put the sum of all of our experiences together, we do things based on the experiences and the perspectives that we've gained from life. That's why it's so important to be able to look at yourself and say, I'm going to take my side today. I have to take my side, but I'm also going to be willing to concede that I might be wrong about some things. And even if I'm going to defend a stance or position that I have, I'm not going to tell you that there's not a possibility that my understanding is wrong on something. It's totally possible. And it's important to be willing to change if you realize that you are wrong about something. But the point I was getting at, though, is kind of to go back to the beginning of this video and the reason why I brought all of this up. We could have empathy and understanding for a historical figure and why they have done the things that they've done. And we can also not endorse the things that they have done. We can understand why Hitler or Caesar or some great figure in history did different things that they've done. And we can also say that despite the fact we understand, that doesn't make it right. And I think it does take courage, because when you stop putting people into the bucket of good and evil, then you have to also face that reality that good and evil exists within yourself. You can't just say, well, I'm on the good side of history, or I'm on the good side of some sort of a socio-political argument of the day, and just assume that you are above reproach because you have chosen the winning team. You have to say, oh no, I'm not necessarily right. It's totally possible that there's something that is driving bias in my life. There's something that is clouding my perspective in a way that makes me toxic, or maybe in need of reappraising my position in life. And that's not comfortable because we like to just believe that we're good. We will like to just take our side. And the truth is sometimes it's important to understand that there's good, there's bad in everyone. And that's relevant in terms of self-reflection. It's relevant in terms of being reasonably patient with other people. But something that I've noticed, which I think is interesting, is that when I look at people in history, when I look at macroeconomics or world events, it's pretty easy to be objective, in my opinion. I can have a book about Hitler sitting there on the shelf next to a book about Queen Elizabeth and Winston Churchill, and there's not really any conflict of interest there. I don't have any grudges against people in the past who have done great deeds for good or evil, because ultimately they haven't done me any good or evil. They're just footnotes in the story of human history. So it's easy to look at these things in a pragmatic way and say, here's the good, here's the bad. And ultimately, I choose to see life through the lens of good. Even characters who've done things that are terrible, I choose to see inspirational things in them. But then you look at personal life. I look at my personal life, and I see people who probably, if I was going to say one way or the other, I would say they're good people. They're not evil people. They're not doing anything wildly bad. Just all of those little things, the small slings and arrows. When somebody looks at you funny, they say something that's vaguely disrespectful. And then you get your feelings hurt in some way. You start to feel angry. You think, how dare you disrespect me? How dare you not do what I want you to do? And we think this about people. And then we start to be very judgmental and critical of everyday actual people in our lives. And it's amazing how easy it is to step back and, look at history or something and say, oh, well, it's all black. It's not black and white. It's shades of gray, and there's good, there's bad, and you just have to kind of respect all of it. And then you try to apply that in your personal life, and you realize how easy it is to very suddenly get off in the bushes of being bitter toward people who really don't have any desire to do you harm. They're just going about their everyday life, trying to navigate their personal demons, trying to survive their life. And sometimes they do things that don't align with what you want. And then you get angry and you think that somehow you are entitled to be treated a certain way or to get what you want. And I think that's where a lot of times when we, like I was saying, when we think that we're the good guys, then we also stop being aware of our own hypocrisy. And so it is important to remember that no matter how much you might feel like you have an excuse for being frustrated with somebody or irritated in the moment, life really is shades of gray. You can't look at what people do and be angry at them because it doesn't align with your personal agenda. People will say things that are sometimes disrespectful. They will do things that are not thoughtful. They will have worldviews and ideas which sometimes are harmful or poorly balanced, or indirectly, unintentionally, they might do things that are harmful in your life. And you should always be willing to forgive people for these things. You should always be willing to have empathy for them, to understand that people aren't doing evil in your life because they want to hurt you or because they are bad. They're just trying to survive. That's all any of us are doing, just trying to find our way in the world, trying to come to terms with a lot of things that are hard to get our heads around. Some of us are better at it than others, but at the end of the day, we're all just trying to find a sense of peace and belonging and purpose in our lives. So, empathy. Put yourself in other people's shoes, forgive them, understand them. Even if they're doing things that are not necessarily right, understand people do things for what, from their perspective, are good reasons. People don't get up in the morning generally and think, oh, I want to go be as evil as possible today. That's not usually how people operate. They get up with the intention that they want to be reasonably good people, and then life happens. But that doesn't mean that there aren't consequences. That doesn't mean you shouldn't set boundaries. It doesn't mean that excuses are okay. Responsibility is important. I think responsibility as a word is interesting because it really just means, are you able to respond? That's what responsibility is, right? The ability to respond. Maybe by extension, the ability to take ownership in your life. When you take responsibility for your life, then you are playing an active role in it. You accept the consequences of your actions. You demonstrate a capacity to course correct, to be pragmatic, and look at all of the different perspectives, and then make an informed decision and adjust your actions accordingly. And responsibility is very important. Being excuse-driven is not good for your life, and it's also not good to allow your life to be negatively impacted by other people who are excuse-driven. That's where I think just as it is important to be empathetic toward people and to understand where they're coming from as much as you can. You've also got to remember that you can't just let anything and everything go. Sometimes you have to take a stand for what you believe is right. And sometimes you have to hold people accountable for their actions by allowing them exposure to the consequences for their actions. Maybe you don't bail people out. Maybe you cut some people off and you don't keep toxic relationships in your life. Or maybe you apply it to yourself. There are times when all of us need to stop and say, you know, I'm going to be gentle with myself. I'm going to forgive myself for all of the things where I tend to feel like I'm not good enough. But I'm also going to say I have to draw a line in the sand. I have to do some things differently. Because it's a fool who does the same thing every single day and always expects different results. So try to walk the balance, walk the line between empathy and also responsibility. Try to be understanding of others and try to be gentle with yourself, but also make a point to take responsibility for your actions, and don't allow people in your life to perpetually not take responsibility, to perpetually signify their identity by a series of abuses, usurpations, and indiscretions, and always let them off the hook. There's a certain point where you have to understand if a person continues to do evil things, you have to treat them not as a person who is evil, but as a person who shouldn't be part of your life. Because, to quote a Bible scripture, light and darkness do not share communion with each other. And that's hard. It's hard to let things go when you have a sense of connection to them. You want to be faithful. Or maybe you want some sort of resolution, some sort of closure. So you hang on to toxic things because you feel like you don't want to let them go. As with all things in life, there isn't a sure answer, because it's all about balance. It's about both. It's about finding a sense of understanding and also having a sense of accountability. It's about focusing on yourself to try to be a better person, while also not making everything about yourself to the point where you stop seeing the good in others. It's about seeing good in others without seeing the world so much through rose-tinted glasses that you live a lie. You know, I was looking at this picture on Facebook a little bit ago today, and it was two pictures of the same scene, and what it was a photographer taking a picture of a couple who had just gotten married, so they're wedding pictures, and they're kissing each other or embracing each other next to this farm gate in a kind of a rural countryside sort of scene. Very nice picture. And so they're embracing each other next to this farm gate fence sort of area, and there's this puddle there, and their reflection is in the puddle, and then the lighting is just right, and it looks great. You know, it's just this really beautiful kind of a scene. It looks very nice. I thought it was a great picture. And then there's another picture there that shows the actual scene without any filter, just the photographer doing what he's doing. And the photographer is laying in this mud puddle in what's basically just a dirty driveway. You know, he's getting filthy in the mud puddle, messing up his clothes while he lays on the ground to get just the right angle. And then he goes through it with post-processing and gets the lighting right. And when you get done working with this imagery, you go from dirty mud puddle at the end of the driveway to a beautiful picture that tells a story and will probably be cherished for a lifetime. And so I'll close with this, because we should always try to be like the photographer in that story, to look at the world not through the kind of rose-tinted glasses that just believe a lie. Not to say we're out of touch to the point where we just lie to ourselves and we say things are good when they're not, and we pretend that things are perfect when they're broken. Not that. But to find a way to see good in the world, to see good in ourselves, to see good in others, and to paint a picture that's beautiful by accentuating the positive and by looking for the right angle, so that we take things that could be viewed as mundane or as problematic or as uninspired, and we find a sense of joy. We find a way to tell a meaningful story through it all. That's what we should be trying to do, to paint not a lie, but a picture that filters out some of the cruelty of life and paints existence in a positive and flattering light as much as possible. And if we can find a way to see life in a positive way without being so out of touch that we put blinders on, that's a good balance to have. So wherever you find yourself, always try to accentuate the positive and also to embrace the truth. Good luck on your adventure. Till next time. Thanks for watching.